Okay, welcome back to another episode of Us Anxious Folk. My name is Lauren, and I am here with a very creatively minded guest, Elijah, who is a filmmaker, and someone who struggles with agoraphobia or has struggled with agoraphobia and lives in Australia too. So lots of similarities here to myself. Welcome, Elijah.
Thank you so much. This is really cool.
Yeah, I'm very excited to have you. Let's go straight in. Tell me your anxiety story.
Yes, so there's quite a bit. I've had anxiety in my life for as long as I can remember, but I didn't quite have the language for it until my late teens. Before
Mhm.
that, I thought it was something else, and I couldn't quite put my foot on it. But the first time I remember having a panic attack, for example, was probably when I was about 11.
Yeah.
I just moved to Ireland at the time with my family, and it was this total structural upheaval, which I think meant that I was a little bit emotionally vulnerable and susceptible to whatever stresses were coming my way.
Mm.
And on this particular day, we had a trip to the Giant's Causeway, which is like the windiest place in the windiest country. And and
Fun.
I guess that just yeah, very fun. But for some reason, I guess the sensory aspect of that just really overwhelmed me. And I had a really bad reaction to it. And I suppose using the logic of an 11-year-old, I thought, well, if a person could chug tons of water and die from that, maybe I could die from all of the wind that's coming into my lungs. I don't know. It made sense at the time. And I just started hyperventilating and thinking that I was going to die. And my family didn't really know how to approach that. So I just wound up ducking into a corner and like hanging out in a gift shop for the rest of that trip. And after that point, I just always had this aversion to sensory things like that, specifically to wind for whatever reason. And whenever I'd find myself in public, I would always, in the back of my mind, be looking for places to kind of duck and cover.
Mhm.
Um, but then moving over to Australia in about a year after that, um, it pretty much went away instantly. I had a proper structure in my life. I think the climate really helped. And high school was a pretty great experience for me. The way that I would label it is just I had a tendency to worry a little bit, but
Mm.
that very rarely took over my life. There were just a handful of instances where in retrospect I can say, oh, that was anxiety.
Right.
Whereas at the time I thought it was just me being overly cautious about things. And sometimes that would be health anxiety, sometimes that would be overanalyzing a situation and acting as if there were far more risks.
Mhm.
Um, but it started turning a bit more sour during COVID, which I'm sure is something that happened for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Those are circumstances which are pretty conducive to like poor mental health, obviously.
Yeah.
Um, and in my case, I'd like just started uni. I went to JMC, which had a film program, and it got shut down within a month because of
Wow.
COVID. The novelty of like the Zoom calls and the Discord calls at first meant that it was fun, but after a certain amount of time, you have all of this creative energy that you were going to put into the project you're excited about. Now it has nowhere to go, so it all kind of goes internal.
Mm.
And I started getting really creative about the different health problems that I might have and thinking, you know, I mean, it was like, I know that I'm a relatively healthy person, but I could die from COVID. And
Yeah.
while I'm at it, maybe there's asbestos in the walls, and maybe I have this kind of cancer and this thing. And throughout that, I discovered that the body can do incredible things to make you feel the sensations that you're thinking about and believing. And I was just sort of taken over by that. Like I
Mm.
was in a great deal of pain, like 24/7. Um, and every day I'd always think it was for a different reason, but it was exceptionally debilitating to the point where like I'd be lucky if I could just get up and make myself a snack. Um, and I wasn't contributing anything to the house. I wasn't working. And because of that, my I needed to leave. My parents said that I needed like 3 or 4 weeks and I needed to be out.
Mm.
Um, at that point, I wasn't able to deal with the logistics of that at all. In
Mm.
different circumstances, I might have said, "Oh, I'll get things together. I'll find a source of income, and I'll find somewhere else to stay." But I I was in the most vulnerable position possible, so I had no mechanisms to handle it whatsoever. Thankfully, though, I have lots of support from family, from friends, and I was able to like crash on couches, so I wasn't like legitimately homeless.
Mm.
Um, but I didn't have a place to call my own, which I think was something I really needed at that particular time, and that just sort of sent the anxiety that was already at 100. It just sent it to 150.
Mm.
Um, and every time I was traversing from one location to another, that was particularly when I felt this craving for that sense of comfort, for like my own kind of place.
Mm.
And I think it wound up blending with those panic attacks I had when I was a kid, that ingrained idea of trying to find some kind of safety, even
Yeah.
though it wasn't for the same reasons, but there was still this idea in the back of my mind that the world is like against you
Mm.
and you need to survive by kind of doing a duck and cover.
Mm.
Um, and that was how I got my first like really major panic attacks where I actually understood it was a panic attack,
Mm-hmm.
which was definitely an eye opener. It was, that same idea of extreme derealization where you don't really know why you're reacting this way. I think the first one started with me thinking that I was about to have like an aneurysm or something as I was walking from the bus to the place where I was cat sitting. And the second that idea just solidified in my mind, I like collapsed to the ground.
Right.
Thankfully, no one was nearby. But it was uh, like it went from health anxiety, but then the second it turned into a full blown panic attack and lights were blaring in my mind, it just went into this whole other like existential place
Mm-hmm.
where I looked at my immediate surroundings and just thought, I don't know why, but this is dangerous.
Yeah.
Something about the openness of the streets, the sky. I don't know, maybe I was having these thoughts about being like sucked up into the sky or something wild, and I just needed to get away from it. So I wound up just hiding in like um the storefront of a Westpac or something. Um just curled up going, "Oh God, is this gonna pass over or do I need to do something?"
Mm.
And I wound up calling Lifeline. It was late at night and there was no one that I knew who I could call. And it wound up being a really positive thing because I hadn't talked about what I'd been going through over that period of time, really.
Yeah.
And obviously, the people who work at Lifeline and Beyond Blue in these different places, they know exactly how to sort of talk you through these things. And I just wound up like bursting into tears, walking across the road and unpacking everything. And I don't remember the majority of it, but one thing I do remember I said was just, I'm really scared of what I'm turning into or
Mm.
the kind of person that this is because it it felt so foreign to what I'd identified myself as. This person who is pretty independent, who's a go-getter, who's really interested in exploring the world and
Mm.
finding the novelty in the world, especially like as a filmmaker and as a creative person, that's what you want to do. And I was really scared that that was going to be taken away from me. Um, and interestingly enough, and I guess this kind of demonstrates that non-linear trajectory of anxiety, that particular instance was both the birth of agoraphobia and it was also kind of the birth to recovery at the same time
Mm-hmm.
because it was the first time that I'd um, opened up about what was going on. And I also just learnt the importance of venting and having a big cry about it, which is so important, you know. Um, but those same feelings that I felt, they stuck with me in the back of my head. The
Mm.
next morning when I went to catch the bus, I was like, what if that happens again?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't want that to happen again, so I'm just going to walk a little bit faster to get to the bus stop, and
Mm.
I'm going to be a little bit more cautious about making sure I do get off at the right stop. And
Mm.
it was just these little safety behaviors which start to like cast a vote towards um, validating the irrational fears and acting as if they're real. Um,
That was worded so beautifully. I just have to I just have to interject there. Wow. Yes, love that. Sorry, proceed.
No, no, totally, totally. Thank you. I mean, I've done a lot of journaling, so it's come up a lot. But that's the way that I look at it. Is just whenever you're put in a situation, where you're faced with like irrational anxiety, because I guess there's a distinction between genuinely having a threat
Yeah.
versus something that isn't really threatening us. Whenever that happens, the way that we respond tends to dictate whether the anxiety is going to go up or whether it's going to go down the next time we
Mm.
experience it.
Hmm.
And that is always like a such a maze to navigate.
Yeah.
But I didn't at the beginning I did not know how to navigate it at all
Mm.
because I didn't really know. Like at this point I didn't know, I wasn't familiar with the word agoraphobia.
Mm.
I knew panic attacks and anxiety, but I didn't know the inner workings of them.
Mm.
Uh, Growing up, I didn't have conversations really about mental health
Mm.
with my friends. I was aware when people would be struggling, but I didn't have enough of a window into it to really to get how it could be like fixed or managed.
Yeah.
Um, so my response was basically just to try and um, hide out and surround myself with things that were just as far away from the stress as possible.
Yeah.
Um, which led me to having lots of moments where I'd think, I won't go out today. I'll do it the next day. And then
Yes.
it becomes, harder and harder. And
Yeah.
it, it's hard to navigate one specific point where you sort of go from not being agoraphobic to being agoraphobic. There are several different steps, but
Mm.
over the course of maybe it was 6 months, maybe it was less. Um, I fully understand that that was what was going on, and it very briefly led to being totally housebound. Um, but for the most part, I'd be able to at least stomach being in the car. But to be honest, everywhere I was, even if I was in my bedroom or my kitchen, it would be this constant battle of just not getting panic attacks because it all sort of stemmed from that belief that having a panic attack would just be the death of me. I didn't know
Mm.
why, but it just would. And after having so many consistent panic attacks and dealing with the stress of avoiding it every day, um, it takes a lot of energy,
Mm.
and you wind up just being so drained to the point where um, you don't really feel sad or happy. You're just in this anhedonic state of not really knowing what anything is. And I think the scariest moment for me when dealing with that was when I would try and look at sources of comfort, like talk to someone who always made me feel better or watch a movie that always brought me comfort.
Mm.
And I would just walk away from the experience going, I, I didn't feel anything from that.
Yeah.
Um, I know I should, but this environment, which is meant to look really beautiful in some animated movie, it doesn't look like anything to me. I
Hmm.
don't feel like I would feel good in the Shire from Lord of the Rings, or
Mm.
looking at that one nice wallpaper that I have, or listening to that song. It just felt like nothing. Um, but by that point, I'd at least started doing enough of the right kind of Googling because there's a lot of wrong Googling.
Oh my God, so much.
Yeah, yeah, so many bad rabbit holes of, hey, I have a tiny little headache. Well, that's because you're about to die.
Yeah.
Like, uh,
Yes. And you're
you know,
never getting better, ever.
yeah, you're never getting better. That's something that is just a constant damnation.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I started sort of learning the pitfalls of that kind of Googling, the WebMD stuff,
Yeah.
and falling onto the right side of the internet and understanding that in order to properly address it and begin overcoming it, you do have to directly face it.
Yeah.
Um, which wound up being this game changer at the time, thinking, wait, what? I have to experience it? Oh my
Mm.
God, that's terrible.
Yes. That's the one thing I can't do. That's so cruel.
Yeah, that's the whole reason I'm here, because I don't
Yeah.
want to. You're telling me
Yeah.
I have to? Jesus. Um, yeah, but there were at least enough times where I said, okay, so what they're telling me is that these panic attacks are not an actual threat, and I kind of need to call the bluff.
Mhm.
And I need to step outside and sort of say, all right, do it. Give me the panic attack.
Mm.
Um, and obviously, when I first started doing that, I don't really feel that way. But it's a fake it till you make it scenario where you tell yourself that, and it at least gives you the confidence where you can step out of your door and take those first few steps,
Mm.
which I think was really important. I kind of lost my train of thought of where I was going from that. Um,
You started doing the right Googling, you got sort of,
mm,
empowered to head out.
yeah, I mean, from that point, I also understood that to address anxiety, it's very helpful to make sure that your just base survival needs are in check first.
Right.
Um, because if I was dealing with these very abstract problems, but at the same time I was getting zero sleep, I wasn't eating, I wasn't drinking water,
Hmm.
then there's a pretty logical explanation for why I'm not feeling great. And
Mm.
if I at least tackle those, it gives me like some sense of security to come back to.
Yeah.
It's it's obviously easier said than done because a lot of the times when we're stressed, the first things that go are like our sleep schedule, our
Yeah.
motivation to work out.
Yeah.
Um,
Drinking water. That's
yeah,
out.
drinking water. Yeah, it's just a nightmare. Like I can't do it. Making myself a meal. Oh God.
Mm.
Um, but I tried just addressing whichever ones felt the most accessible. If there was a moment where I was feeling in good shape, even if the timing didn't quite see right, I would just like run around my living room or put on a song and just try to dance to it and um clean my space so that it would be a bit more functional.
Yeah.
So little steps like that at least gave me a solid home base, and then eventually when I was able to get a home of my own as well, that obviously helped because you can create an environment which brings you some kind of comfort. But even then, 24/7, life was still just this battle of avoiding panic attacks. I was gradually learning this idea that they're not a real threat and how you're meant to overcome them, but I didn't fully believe it yet.
Mm.
And I started trying to work on these beliefs. And I thought maybe the most effective thing, instead of saying panic attacks aren't going to hurt you and everything, because that feels like such a foreign concept,
Mm.
it's just to believe that I can handle it. Maybe
Yeah.
it is really difficult, but I am strong enough that I can deal with it.
Mhm.
So, um, at first I heard people talk about affirmations, and I didn't really quite. I thought repeating the exact same sentence over and over again,
Mhm.
that isn't really going to do anything for me personally, but maybe breaking down why I am that thing, maybe that will help.
Mhm.
And I just became really obsessed for a period of maybe a week or two. Every little thing I do, no matter how mundane or silly it was, I would say, look at me being productive. Look at how, I was hungry, I made myself a meal. My clothes were dirty, I did the laundry. Wow, I can handle things. I am a really capable person.
Mhm.
And after enough times of consciously doing that, despite how sort of silly and small it seemed, um, I was able to see more situations where that would just sort of naturally come up in my head. And at one point, I found myself with that same adrenaline building up, that same fear of, oh my God, I have to go through this same routine of avoidance that I was doing, dunking my head in cold water and
Mm.
exploring all of these different things, the safety items, going through the whole loop. And then I thought, wait a minute, I've been spending all of this time establishing the fact that I can handle it. So why am I not putting my money where my mouth is?
Mm.
And as cheesy as it is, I just sort of dropped all of these little items. I stood there, I closed my eyes when I was feeling all of this anxiety build up, and I like held out my hands and I just took deep breaths and just said, I can handle this,
Mhm.
which I'd never done before. I was always curling up and running away. But this particular time, I just thought I'm gonna stand there, this wave of anxiety is gonna come over me, and I'm gonna ride with it
Mhm.
instead of avoiding the crash. Uh, I don't know if I was standing there for like 30 seconds. I don't know if it was 10 minutes. You tend to lose track of time with these things.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
but eventually that wave sort of washed over me, and I went, "Wow, it didn't kill me. Um, I'm still here." And we always fear that anxiety is going to lead us to something, but we never really know where. Like, where
Yeah.
exactly is the pinnacle?
Yeah.
And in that regard, I felt like I'd called its bluff and gone, oh no, there is no pinnacle. I've
Mm.
already seen the pinnacle. The
Mm.
pinnacle is like all those previous panic attacks, but it doesn't actually get any worse than that.
Yeah.
Um, and then for the rest of that afternoon, I felt great because I thought, I was like,
I've
well,
done
yeah, the panic,
it.
yeah, I've done it. It's over, but because
Yeah.
I thought, like the panic could come back, the anxiety could come back, and I'm not going to run away from it. It's like, you're welcome to be here.
Mm,
I'll deal with it the same way that I just did. Now, like, I recognize the fact that I wasn't totally out of the woods, and it wasn't some, you know, epic moment where in one foul swoop you get rid of your mental health problems forever. I knew that I would still have difficulty going outside, but
yeah.
I thought, I have now created a bubble of safety where there is at least some place in my life where I know panic and my own mind is not a threat to me, which
Mhm.
was not how I felt before. It was like, unconditionally, wherever you are, whatever the circumstances are, you
Yeah.
have to run from this.
Yeah.
Um, and that was definitely a big game changer in the recovery journey for sure.
Hmm.
Mm.
Amazing. I got chills when you were talking about like, when you just dropped all the safety stuff and you were like, I'm gonna do this. Like, because that's that. Oh, I know, I remember what that feeling is like to face
Mm.
it. And it is so hard when you've spent so long running.
It's very hard. Yeah, and it's also difficult because of how non-linear it is, and the fact that you can't just do that once.
Yeah.
It sort of has to be this repetitive thing of there will be several different stages of doing that, because you know
Mm,
this didn't happen yesterday. This was a couple of years ago, and the journey still isn't over. And to a degree, like with the film I made, I wanted to make sure not to give this black and white idea of, congratulations, you've overcome it, now it's no longer a threat to you.
mm,
Because every piece of media, or at least that I've seen when it comes to fiction, books, movies, um, seems to have this very black and white idea that that is just how mental health works, that you
yeah.
need some kind of external motivation and then it's just gone.
Mm,
But in my experience, you may have one particular moment where you now have a handle of it, and then you go on to do the gradual work every single day of just getting 1% better. And
mm,
that's kind of what I wanted the story to be,
mm,
to paint a slightly more realistic picture. Um, but yeah, I found that after having that experience, at least in my day-to-day life in home, I had some level of security, and I was able to do the long form work of saying, where exactly does all of this come from? Is it important where it comes from?
mm,
Exploring all of these different routines,
yeah.
um, going through the process of exposure, and basically just thinking, I need to take the bubble of safety that I have now in the house, and eventually the safety that I had in cars as well,
Hmm.
um, and just keep expanding it further and further, rather than creating some totally new thing, um,
Yeah.
which it is difficult. But it's a very gradual step by step thing.
Yeah, it is. There's there's so much that came up for me listening to your story. The first thing I wanted to point out is how you were talking about, running and ducking for cover. It's very like instinctual, like it reminds me of like an animal, how, when they're afraid, they will find like a little corner, a little hole where it's just, very secure. And I think that we forget a lot of the time that we are these animal creatures as well.
Hmm.
Like, yes, we're capable of creating iPhones and like all the rest of it, but we're also like driven by instinct. And,
Hmm.
I don't think it's an unusual thing to find a little area where you feel safe. Especially when you had a time where you didn't have that home base and you needed to create some kind of safety. It makes
Mm.
sense that um I don't know, that you would struggle so hard to have that sense of safety when you don't have that place where you can run and hide.
Mm.
Um, but the other thing that really stuck out at me is how you were talking about this idea that there's a destination, not only like there being a pinnacle of panic, but there being, in movies where it's like we have some kind of hero's journey and then we have this realization and then everything is better again, or like the idea of getting a beach body. It's like the beach body is the destination, but where
Mm.
after that? Like,
Yeah, 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 exactly. Like,
yeah, so
surely we
it's
need some other like thing to aspire to. So what do we
Yes.
do once we get there?
Yeah, and there isn't even a there really. Like when it comes to mental health, it's always going to be a changing landscape. There's never going to be like an end point until we, don't have health anymore. But yeah, so I think a lot of the time with agoraphobia and mental health in general, the frustrating part is like, I want to be better, but not understanding that there are those incremental steps to better, and better isn't necessarily a destination. It's just day by day.
Exactly. And that's why happiness can't really be this conditional thing based
Mm.
on I am going to be happy and succeed once I get to this place.
Yeah.
Because there are lots of people at that place who do
Mm.
not consider themselves happy. And
Mm.
I actually remember a moment, someone said something to me that at the time I think I didn't know how to feel about. I was almost offended, but I now really understand it. And I was talking to them about the difficulty of being almost housebound, how I felt like I was missing out on so many experiences that you're meant to have in your early 20s,
Mm.
and saying, I just want to, you know, get through this so I can actually go out there and go to live music whenever I want. It makes dates easier, all of these different things. And they just said to me, like, just so you know, it's not that much better out here, you know,
Yeah.
is that there are still issues, and when you overcome this, and they gave me that encouragement of it's not if, it's when.
Mm.
Um, they were saying you will find other things to complain about,
Mm.
and difficulty is relative, pain is relative,
Yeah.
so they will still impact you. And the way that I look at it is going through this experience, I'm sure that if I'm able to comfortably catch buses and do all of these things, there will still be this level of gratitude that I will always have going, hey, I mean, this is shit, but at least I'm able to be here, you know.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it doesn't invalidate the struggles that we have. So I've very much tried remembering that and saying, just because I'm here, it does not mean this time is wasted. It does not
Mm.
mean that I'm a failure until I get to the stage where this is all in the back burner.
Yeah.
I can still have versions of success. I can still move forward as just a human being. I can be like a kinder person or a more intelligent person.
Mm.
And while we're still dealing with this, we don't need to make our lives miserable. We may
Mm.
need to make more accommodations. Um, but like let's find excuses just to dress up. You might not be going out, but like, when you're cooking, like put on a suit, make yourself a nice meal, just find ways of making it work, because I don't think we're doing ourselves any favors if we're going through this and just forcing ourselves into depression,
Mm.
because is that really going to motivate us?
Mm.
Are we really going to be on our best physical shape, a
Mm.
shape that is suitable for pushing our boundaries and overcoming these things if
Mm.
we're consistently kind of deepening the struggle?
Yeah.
I think like there's a balance there, because on one hand, there's a certain amount of just like unavoidable like dread
Mm.
that comes with it. There are certain difficulties which we can't dodge. And I think it's important to like not run from those and to accept those. And it means that every now and again we are going to have days which just suck, and we shouldn't change that.
Yeah.
Um, but there are other days where it's also important to kind of say, let's take stock in what is going right and
Hmm.
understand that this doesn't have to make up 100% of our wellness or our happiness. Because I know some people who um are struggling, but in every other like area of their life they go, oh, it's wonderful, it's just
Mm.
that I can't leave the house.
Mm.
And even in my life, I think one thing which is slightly different from my experience of agoraphobia in comparison to others, it's different for everyone, but one thing that's slightly more rare is that for me it doesn't have anything to do with social anxiety.
Mm.
um it's a bit more existential, which means that that is something that I can be grateful for, that I'm not worrying about. I have friends. I enjoy talking to people,
Mm.
even if sometimes my scope of interactions is a bit more limited.
Yeah.
Um, I can be really grateful for the ones that I have,
Mm.
and I guess all of us have areas where we might be doing worse than others, we might be doing better than others. But yeah, it is important to have that awareness that it's not just a ladder that you can eventually get to the top of. It's this like ever-changing thing.
Yeah, it's a constant square dance with success and failure at the same time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Mm,
exactly. Very much like a Sisyphus type thing where like
mm,
as long as we have somewhere to go,
mm.
um, then that's good. And if we
Yeah,
eventually found ourselves at a point where we just didn't know what to do next, even if we were just at the top of the world, we would still feel terrible because like going back to something you said before about the fact that we are still animals, that we're still dealing with these very hunter-gatherer brains.
mm,
We do need something to go
mm.
towards.
Yes, yeah.
And I think that, part of me even wonders if anxiety as we know it is inherently a modern problem because we have, our amygdala is firing off. We have all of this adrenaline and cortisol that we need to burn,
Mm,
and it's designed for when we find a bear.
mm.
We get attacked by a bear, and in that moment, our amygdala fires off and says, okay, these were the different triggers that could potentially signal a bear attack. So next time, I'm going to save you
Avoid
some
that.
struggle. Yeah, it's like if we see something in the distance that looks like a bear, if we hear the trees rustling in the same way, then
Yeah.
that is enough to give us anxiety. But when you live in like the suburbs of Sydney, you don't see a lot of bears. And you like our life isn't, in like, my position. Um, Thankfully, I don't have my life being literally threatened quite a lot, which
Yeah.
means that there's all of this stuff in my brain which doesn't have a place to go.
Mm,
So I guess I just have a panic attack at the grocery store to get some of that stuff out of my system.
yeah.
And then suddenly you wind up putting those associations of genuine um, dread onto things which don't require it at all.
That's
Um,
right.
that's why it's disorder. It's like anxiety is not inherently a bad thing. It's meant to be in our system. It's helpful in so many regards. It's
Hmm.
only a problem when it's going to the wrong place.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
I feel that deeply. I've always been uncomfortable with the what's the word? Like the bastardization of anxiety in general.
Mm,
Like the whole
mm,
be anxiety free. It's like not possible, really.
mm.
And I remember my doctor saying to me at the very beginning of my journey, he was like, "You're just bored." Like he was like, "You need something creative to do." And I was like,
Mm.
"How rude." Like I just remember being so upset by that. But I think there was a lot of truth in that, that our
Mhm,
brains are bored and I don't know, there's a lot of energy that we're not expending that we're maybe supposed
mm,
to be. Um,
mhm,
but so I do want to get to your film, but
mm,
before I get to that, I
mm,
did just want to touch on something that you spoke about, and I don't think it's spoken about enough. You were discussing how like things that used to sort of make you feel better kind of now had those blunt edges where nothing really felt great.
mm,
I think that happens to a lot of people struggling with anxiety, and I think it really scares the shit out of them because it's like, if I don't enjoy things anymore, what's the point? And that can last quite a long time. Can you speak a bit about that? And did you find a reprieve? Like, what
Yeah,
happened?
it is really scary. Like there's no real way around that because I guess this applies to all of anxiety, but specifically since agoraphobia is often based on needing to have options. As
Mm,
long as you have options of escape, you tend to function relatively well. Um, Not having the option for comfort or for humor
mm,
is a horrifying thing, and you start to wonder if you ever had it before and if you'll ever have it again.
yeah.
And sometimes it may just be based on the fact that we naturally will gravitate to different things over the course of our life. Maybe this one song just doesn't appeal to us because we've grown out of it. But then also, in the more likely case, when we're struggling with these things, um, it's just because our brain it does not have enough energy to elicit those feelings at this
Mhm.
stage. Um, so I basically just ran off faith during that time. I ran off the faith that eventually it would come back. And there would need to be a period of time where I was kind of moving forward blind. Like I would just make sure that physically I was as healthy as I could be to tackle this.
Hmm.
I would still make sure to engage in the things which I knew would bring me joy, even if I didn't feel the full extent of that. I thought physiologically, I'm sure it is doing something good for me. I mean, it's better to do those things than things which are actively making me feel bad,
Yeah.
right? So I would still I would still try and find places to laugh, and I would still try and seek out things which showed some kind of beauty in the world. Um, and I guess journaling helped as well. Unpacking different things and being open about what I was struggling with, but then also having a regular gratitude practice.
Mm.
Even if I couldn't fully feel that gratitude, I could say, well, I'm grateful for the fact that I did, have a place to sleep. Otherwise, that would have been pretty terrible. And listing all of these things, eventually you do just notice them in your life. It's it still isn't quite a feeling, but you notice it. And
Mhm.
you can go about your day saying, oh, it's a good thing that happened.
Mhm.
Oh, I'm happy that that happened. And you're like, wait, happy? Is that's a word that hasn't entered my lexicon in a while.
Yeah.
Um, and in a way, it almost becomes a fake it till you make it thing as well.
Mhm.
But gradually, I think that we can cultivate those emotions, but also um, we have to allow time for our cup to fill. And
Mm.
in order for that to happen, it can't be drained by the other things as much. So it is very difficult. Like we're talking about the fact that we do need to face anxiety, but at the same time, anxiety can be this very emotionally draining thing. And I think that simply having panic attacks all of the time is enough to just deplete you of your energy and just have your entire world go black and white for a period of time.
Yeah.
So I think when you're in that stage, in the short term, a certain amount of avoidance is perfectly valid, in my opinion.
Mm.
Um, if we just need to hunker down and have ourselves a hot Milo and just do just whatever feels better.
Yeah.
And sometimes that will be yoga, sometimes that would just mean spending ages in bed. Um, but allowing the burnout that comes from anxiety and panic attacks to deplenish a little bit, because we often forget that our mind is still a part of our body, and like every other part of our body, it can operate in a similar way where we get injured and we need a certain amount of time to heal.
Mm.
And we give ourselves, like, one thing I found that's interesting is that I can beat myself up a lot of the time for not being productive and not taking full advantage of the day. But when I'm really sick, I don't have that feeling at all, because I
Yeah.
think there is total justification for me not doing anything.
Yeah.
I'm sick, and if I keep working, I'm going to be more sick. So it is in my best interests to watch a Pixar film and just, eat junk food and do nothing. Or, maybe not eat junk food, but that's how you
Yeah.
feel.
Depends how sick you are, but
Yeah,
yeah.
I'll give myself, but that's the point, is that for some reason I will just give myself a pass
Yeah.
and not beat myself up despite every other aspect of my personality being totally opposite.
Mm.
And I thought about that and I went, well, why don't I give myself that same justification when mentally I'm feeling in the dumps?
Mm.
Um, like, sure, we can't take a mental day every single day, but every now and again, it is perfectly valid to have that recovery time, because it's the exact same principle. We
Yeah.
need to recover. It's not in our best interests to constantly be running on empty,
Mm.
because then the tank's never going to fill up.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. I completely agree. Brain health needs to be more of something that's, something we recognize, but
Mm,
at the same token, it's that slippery slope of like, oh, I should take it easy and I should
mm.
cancel for the next 6 months because, so it's
Yeah,
hard to tread that line.
it is so hard.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I think that overall, I feel pretty positive about the way that discussions around mental health have evolved. The
Mm.
fact that people do have more awareness of it. At the same time, I also get scared of it going too far in the direction of self-care and validation, where it turns into, don't worry about anyone else, don't worry about your job. just take care of yourself. It's all about you. And then
Yeah.
suddenly you just wind up, never taking any steps out of your comfort zone
Yeah.
under the guise of self-care.
Self-care.
And that can be really dangerous because you can say to yourself, wow, I'm really prioritizing myself, but you don't feel that good
Yeah.
because you're not moving forward. And I think it is very difficult, and it's up for every individual to find their own balance
Mm.
of when to give themselves that time off and when to give themselves a little bit of, um, you know, like quiet time,
Yeah.
but also what times to say, all right, get up off your ass, let's do this, let's
Yes.
go. You know, we feel terrible, we feel a panic coming along, but you know what? We're going to do it anyway. And generally speaking, after that, we go, oh, thank God I actually did that. Thank God I
Yeah.
got out of bed and decided to have a workout and a cold shower. Um, we tend to feel great.
Mm.
Um, like, I guess most of the time, the metric for that is just doing that more days that you do the opposite,
Mm.
having more days where you push yourself. Uh, but if the days where you um, decide to call it quits, if those days are happening more frequently than the days when you push yourself, maybe it's time to reassess and
Yeah.
think, is this really the trajectory that you want to go? But that can still depend. It
Mm.
depends on people's level of ability. It depends on the specific place they are in their
Yeah.
mental health journey.
Yeah.
Um, I think the most important part is just being mindful of it and making a conscious decision.
Yeah. That checking in and that old adage of everything in moderation. Everything in
Exactly.
moderation. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm such like that is absolutely my motto.
Hmm.
Just there, everything is black and white. The the only absolute is that there are no absolutes,
Yeah.
and even when it comes to things which help us deal with our anxiety, there is always a version of it which is too much.
Mm.
And I think that one of the dangers that can keep us in a state of avoidance is our vices and the things which give us comfort. Um, and sort of that is like the main idea of my film, basically, is
Mhm.
that we have anxiety shown in a slightly more fantastical way, but when you're dealing with anxiety, at some point you're going to come across something which seems to just make it magically go away,
Mhm.
um, or at least give you some relief from it for a period of time. Whether that's medication, whether it's like a certain object, person, like whatever it is, and then you go, "Oh my God, I found the magic sauce. Now I'm just going to stick with this thing and never let it go ever."
Yes.
Um, and you might feel okay for a period of time, but when you're running from anxiety, it will always catch up. And
Mm.
eventually, your sort of baseline of contentment and stress will meet you where you're at. And you think, oh my God, even with this thing, I'm
Mhm.
still feeling anxious.
Yeah.
So I better double down. And,
Yeah.
uh, you know, and I think you know, that can be a really scary thing when we're locked in a place of avoidance because we just need so many things. Like in the early stages of um, being agoraphobic, I had so many safety behaviors and safety things to the point where walking out the door was embarrassing. Like
Yes, you got
just
so many things.
yes, no, no, even I mean, even to this day, I always carry a backpack around. But back then, it was like I've got the backpack and it's full of like everything.
Yes.
I'd be, I'd be taking the garbage out, and I
Yeah.
would have my headphones on. I'd wear a beanie. It would be 30 degrees, and I would have to wear like 3 layers to give myself some comfort and a feeling
Yeah.
of being cozy. Um, I'd be playing like 8 hours of relaxing, whatever.
Mm.
And I just have all of these little knickknacks that I gathered mostly from YouTube. Like um I saw like one video saying that if you bounce a tennis ball from your left hand to your right hand, it sort of like unites the two sides of your brain and like stimulates your parasympathetic nervous system or
Oh,
something.
oh,
And
yep.
that became like a grounding exercise, which at first I thought, oh, I could do this like once a day and it could be great. But then you obsess over it and it becomes quite intense.
Mm.
And um basically it was just a process of weaning off all of these things so that you have less and less baggage. And as you do that, the sort of looming threat of anxiety seems to be a slightly smaller monster because you're like,
Mm.
well, I don't need as many weapons to fight it, so I guess it's not as extreme.
Mm. Yeah, I have a whole chapter in my book about the path of most resistance, how these safety behaviors just add up over time to be the thing that is drowning us. And that's why, specifically why in the book I didn't talk about anything in particular that necessarily helps, like any techniques or anything like that. Because I'm
Mm.
like, at the end of the day, the the technique becomes the anxiety, you know?
Exactly.
Like, yeah. But let's go into the film because
Sure.
I'm very intrigued. You um have, alluded to how you've delved into fantasy to help explain agoraphobia.
Yeah.
Tell us about it.
Yeah, so my logic there is that you can very effectively tell a story literally and just say this is an experience of mental health or this is that. Um, but I don't really think that that is taking full advantage of a fictional medium. There's a place for that even in fiction, but it's particularly most effective in books or YouTube videos. And I feel that the way that I can best contribute is not in those mediums because I think that like I don't always feel like the way that I communicate verbally is the most accurate way to what's in my head.
Mm.
But film has always been like from day one, I wanted to be a filmmaker. Throughout high school, I made short films and I was sort of ready to go into the adult world, making, millions of them and then eventually make a feature film at the end of uni. And I just thought that's going to be my life and it's going to be great. Um, and then becoming agoraphobic, I thought, okay, I guess that's dead in the water
Mm.
because surely in order to make films, you have to travel around.
Mm.
There's so much networking and stuff that you need to do. So until I overcome this, I can just do nothing. Um, and I didn't really have space for any creativity at all for like the first year. I wanted to, but I just simply was so ingrained in recovery and
Yeah.
research surrounding neuroscience and
Mm.
just all of these things.
Mm.
Um, then once I eventually did have some space in my life to think, I want to at least start building up my writing practice again because I write my own stuff. Um, I was following that write what you know adage and thinking, well, I spent the last year researching anxiety. It only stands to reason that like even if I try to write something else, it will turn into a story about anxiety.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, and and it just sort of became a no-brainer. Like, of course, I have to tell a story about this because of how personal it is. And also, I thought, well, if a story is about agoraphobia, then it will probably be filmed in someone's house. And
Yeah.
I can
I
access
can
a
do that.
house. Yeah, I can do that exactly. So it made perfect sense. But then I also went it would feel in a short film, and the movie's half an hour long, but I was like, a movie that's just about plain old agoraphobia with no bells and whistles, that is not interesting to me
Mhm.
because I want it to be about mental health, but I also want it to be entertaining as a film to anyone. I think that one of the benefits of bending reality and turning it into a fable, essentially, is that people aren't necessarily looking at it as just a story about agoraphobia. They can imagine whatever is the most relevant thing for them and say that it's about that. So this could be a movie about any number of things.
Mhm.
It's just that I personally was channeling my experience with agoraphobia. And essentially, I was thinking about all of the different like irrational thoughts that I would have during panic attacks, all of the things I'd imagine were happening. Like we were talking about that threat where you wonder where it's going to go.
Mm.
I would think in those moments, where do I fear it's going to go? Let's show that and let's have that be the thing. So, um, I was mentioning before that in that one panic attack, I sort of feared the idea of getting sucked up into the sky. So I went with the idea of this is a character who has an affliction of getting shot up into the sky. It doesn't matter how exactly it started for this character, but the point is they have it, and now they have to stay in their house all of the time because otherwise they're gonna get shot up into the atmosphere and lose oxygen, and who knows what's gonna happen.
Wow.
Um, and that puts them in the position of an agoraphobic person,
Mhm.
though it can be sort of under the guise of something that's like borderline sci-fi.
Mm.
Um, But throughout the story, they're able to find various things which seem to cure this problem until, you know, it doesn't anymore, and it makes things worse. And now they're chained to these things forever, and it makes life more and more difficult. So um, that was a way of achieving lots of different things. It means that the story can sort of be cinematic and just entertaining in its own right while still being personal. And it means that hopefully, because it's using a metaphor, which I'd like to think can be applicable to a lot of things, it means that it's not just like a vanity project that exclusively talks about my struggle, which also is fine to do.
Mm.
Um, it fantasy, I believe, is able to broaden the topic into something that invites people in a little bit more.
Hmm. Yeah. I love that you chose that he gets sucked up into the sky.
Mm,
I think
mm,
that draws a lot of parallels with that feeling of like you don't know where you're going to go exactly, but you're going to go somewhere and you're not going to be able to cope. Like
mhm.
it's beyond what you can handle. Um,
Yeah.
were there any other themes in the film that really like were kind of life imitating art for you or art imitating life?
Yeah, I mean, basically everything in the film has some kind of correlation to my own personal experience. I just sort of disguised them to various degrees. But something that's really important in the film is the way that self-help can sometimes be a manipulative thing.
Mm,
And sometimes we can fall into with too much reliance. So, um, basically is this character, and I'm sort of not using too much obvious language, like not spoil things for like people watching. But as this character sort of incrementally winds up creating more armor to avoid this affliction, um, at a certain point, about halfway through or not quite halfway through the movie, it comes with like a little CD which has a recording,
mm,
and at this point in the film, we think maybe this is someone who's secretly watching him and it's like a conspiracy. But then it gradually becomes clear as this recording says, in 30 days, I'm going to teach you how to be a brand new person. It's like, this wasn't meant for this character. This is just some random self help tape, which is given to this guy. But
mm,
he follows it religiously
mhm.
because, as I'm sure you've seen going on certain sections of YouTube, there's not a ton of content specifically about agoraphobia, but some of the content that does exist begins explaining the story and sort of asking these questions. Are you like this? Is your life terrible? And then you go, yeah, my life is terrible. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're totally right. And then they go, well, my life was terrible too. And they, get into a story about their own experience. It validates us and it shows us that we're in trustworthy, good hands. And
Yep.
then they say, I'm going to give you the ticket out if
Mhm.
you buy my course, you know,
Mm,
and
yes.
there is a lot of stuff online which is not like that. There are like a handful of people who I think have helped me so incredibly much without spending a cent. um
Yeah.
but for every person like that, there are also people who seem to be taking advantage of the vulnerability of people.
Yeah.
And that's something which I look at a lot of the self-help industry for and feel a little bit sickened, because I
Mm,
think, you know, people are desperate to get some kind of solution to deal
yeah.
with depression, trauma, grief, whatever it is.
Hmm.
And of course they're going to pay this money because
Mm,
they have to.
yeah.
And the only reason this happens, and this was sort of a trail I went down one time where I thought, let's say that Tony Robbins' goal, which isn't to actively call out one specific person, but just as an example of someone who's in the industry,
Yes.
um, if their goal is to provide help to people, mental clarity, confidence, let's say it worked, and let's say that every single person on the planet has perfect mental health. Who pays for the courses now?
That's
You don't
right.
get any business.
Yes.
and and that just sort of made me think, I bet that there are some people out there, it's probably a slim margin of people in the industry, who don't quite want people to fully recover.
Mm,
They want people to get close, but still need help. And
mhm.
that was sort of something I wanted to lean into with the movie, is that this is a character who just needs a solution, and they're willing to basically call anyone a god as long as they provide an answer.
Yeah.
But regardless of how helpful these answers actually are, we still need to do a lot of the legwork ourselves, and we can't fully rely on anyone, like regardless of how well intentioned they are anyway,
Yeah.
you know? And
Yeah.
it sort of it has to become a journey of independence and like self-actualization in saying, I'm not going to rely on these videos, this tape, these
Mhm.
various safety mechanisms. They help you along the way and they do lead to that path, but at
Mm.
a certain point you need to like let go of them and take the reins yourself. And that was something I wanted to lean into in the film.
I'm really glad that you did speak to that because I think it's the self-help industry is huge, and I came across so many of those programs in, trying to recover from agoraphobia, and I couldn't afford any of them because I wasn't
Yeah,
working and I
exactly
was on
same.
disability payments. And
Same, yeah.
yeah, and it just seemed so cruel. And I'm like, they know the answer and I need it, but I can't afford it.
Exactly. And it would be
Yeah.
so simple. It's like one of the things, like I genuinely, I cannot stress enough how much your videos helped me. Like I had this playlist, which was specifically for, every video, which sort of really, really helped me. And like there were quite a few of yours. Um,
Thank
and I
you.
think that like the thing there is that, you weren't saying this was my experience. Now to hear the tips you
Yeah.
have to pay all of this money. You're explaining it because it's your experience and it's just words.
Mm.
Like there's a way to go deeper into it with like one-on-one coaching or doing various different things, and for that it's reasonable for people to turn it into a business and ask for money for sure. But when it comes purely to information, to
Yeah.
words,
Yeah.
it doesn't need to be expensive, so why is it? You know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Why does it have to be three monthly payments of $1,000? Like, what are you going to tell
Exactly.
me that's so amazing? But
Exactly. What kind of words are worth that money? You know?
yeah. Yeah. Was there anything in the film for you that was particularly cathartic to not only like to have represented in your film, but to also like come to realize yourself as you were creating it?
Uh, yeah. Um, with the last part of that I'm not even sure what my answer would be. But for my first, in regards to what was cathartic, from the get-go, I knew that it would be the stuff related to the triggers, the fact that this character is sort of getting shot up, and I basically thought I need to try my best to portray whatever is most scary to me personally,
Mm.
because even if other people think shot up into the sky, that's not scary at all. What the fuck? Like, because it's sort of it's this irrational thing where people are like, but you're not going to. Gravity exists.
Yes.
Um, and I thought that aspect doesn't matter as much because it's more about how you portray something. And if you portray it from the place where you personally find it scary and you film it in that way, you perceive it in that way and bring it across with the actor, um, a certain amount of that is going to come across.
Mm.
And I would often, when I would go out on walks, I would have these flashes of that happening to me, and it would be very sort of violent and abrasive, and I would feel like my brain was just skittering all over the place. And I thought the role of the scene centered around anxiety in this film is to try and most accurately recreate my POV.
Hmm.
um, because I don't know what other people's experience of anxiety is, but this is mine, and it is the only way I know how to show something scary.
Mm.
um, you know. So I also realized very early on that when we're experiencing anxiety, a lot of the times we lose any sense of rationality. We're not really cognizant of why we're afraid of these things or what even they mean.
Yeah.
They're often very illogical. So actually taking the steps to break it down, write it in a script, shot list it, do those shots, edit it, and you're suddenly analyzing it in a very clinical way over and over and over again.
Mm.
And I thought well, that's one way to take power away from it. It's not
Yeah.
just these quick flashes that I dread. It's something that I'm seeing every day. And I'm doing exposure therapy simply by sitting at my computer on Premiere Pro editing the thing.
Mm.
Um, and that was incredibly cathartic because I was putting all of my fears under a microscope
Mm-hmm.
and seeing them for how silly they are or how illogical they are. And that doesn't invalidate the emotions that I felt, but it was able to show me that they're not necessary,
Mm-hmm.
that there's nothing to really be scared of here.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I cannot even tell you how much that helped. And also very much the conversations I had with our actor who, um, in the film, there's one person. I knew that from the start. And our actor in the film was someone that I've been friends with for a while. And we were able to have these very, very deeply personal conversations where I was able to express some things which are, like in detail what I was going through, things which they weren't even fully aware of. And
Mm.
likewise, I was able to hear how they personally related to it. They didn't have experience with agoraphobia, but they have their own struggles. And they
Mm.
were able to say, this is what I'm thinking of in this moment. And it wound up not only bringing me closer to them as a person, but just creating a very important dialogue, opening up to someone.
Mm.
Um, and understanding that even if our specific stories are different, none of us are totally alone.
Mm.
And we always have that support, even to the degree of um, I knew that once we'd finished filming, they were able to recognize moments where I was feeling more anxious
Mm.
because they'd like studied my behavior in order to like mimic me for the movie.
Yeah.
They said at one point, like, I've been mimicking your walk. And I was like, have you? Um,
I'd become so conscious there of like, how am I walking
I
right now?
know, I know, I did. And then I did the worst thing where I asked, what is my walk? And they said
No.
it's kind of this bouncy thing, but when you get stressed, it changes to this. And I'm like, oh God. Um, but it was, but it was okay. Um, so that was incredibly sorry, what was the second half of your question? How do you put it?
I think I was asking, were there realizations that you had that you weren't aware of prior to the film, you know?
Mm, yeah, it is tough. I mean, I guess leaning into the that idea that we were talking about earlier about it being like a very non-linear process where there isn't a singular moment where you overcome it, and thinking, um after the movie is done, this character still has a way to go.
Mm.
And I guess that very much helped me reckon with the fact that um I I don't actually need to have this um totally out of the way in order to find success. Like that fear I had that I wouldn't be able to make any kind of films. It wasn't necessarily about success in like a financial sense, but it was just I didn't think that I would be able to have a voice as a creator. Because if I'm stuck in here, then surely I just don't have a platform to speak. And if I do have a platform to speak, maybe it won't be valid. Because even in the prospect of making this movie, I thought I'm a person who's making a story essentially about agoraphobia, partially about overcoming it, and I haven't quite done that myself. And I thought,
Mm.
does that make me a fraud? Does that
Yeah.
mean that this movie doesn't actually hold weight? And that kind of scared me. But I wound up being really proud of the movie, and I thought to myself, despite all of the logistical hurdles that come with trying to make a movie when you can barely walk 5 minutes from your house, I look at the film and I think I didn't actually compromise that much. Like the film that I made is more or less the film in my head.
Mm.
And the only compromises I had are ones that you're always going to have when you're making a movie with fuck all money.
Yeah.
Like,
No
that's just
budget.
natural. Yeah, I mean, I can't afford like some Arri Alexa incredible camera. It's like I'm working with this little dinky thing.
Mm.
So, um, I I was really happy with that, and I was able to pat myself on the back, going, I can keep going towards overcoming this. I can keep taking steps to healing,
Mm.
but I don't need to in order to have a valid voice or to find success. My life is still just as worthwhile now. Um, and that I think that was a very healing thing. It just made me feel like I wasn't wasting my time, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. I have to say, I think your voice, I mean, your voice is always valid, but I think it holds a lot
Exactly.
more weight when you are in the thick of it, to be honest. Like I felt the same things about writing a book, because I
Mm.
still struggle with panic sometimes. And I think while there is the odd person who's like, oh, but I thought you were completely healed and you're not, what the fuck? Like,
Yeah.
I think that people can relate more when you are amongst it and you know how it feels because you're standing
Mm.
right there.
Mhm.
Um, I think it's you're able to access it in a really beautiful way. What has been the feedback with the film? How have people responded to it?
It's been really good. Like, I wasn't really sure what would happen because the film's quite weird. It doesn't have a lot of dialogue, and it's dealing with these metaphorical things, and I thought people would just go like, "What the hell?" Um, but people got it. People got that it was meant to represent anxiety. And I mean, I wasn't hiding that aspect in the film by any means,
Mm,
but what was really lovely about showing it to people at the premiere and the people that I've sent the movie to, like through links because they're in other countries and things, was people were telling me about their own anxiety stories and saying, that moment in the film where this happened, I had that exact moment happen, or I totally understood this emotional space is something which I really needed to see in order for me to let it out, when they had that experience. Um, and that was awesome. It's what I very much hoped the movie would be able to do, but I don't want to make the assumption that my movie has the capacity to, heal or help other people. All I can say is what it's doing for me. And generally speaking, even though we all have our own differences, we're not that different. So
mm,
hopefully, if it resonates with me and heals me in some capacity, it stands to reason that it might be able to heal other people too.
mm,
And it was really lovely to see that that happened, and that to a degree it opened up conversations about mental health, at very least, in the local sphere of the people who saw the film. Because um while I think that's an area that's getting better right now, people talking about mental health, there is still a certain amount of stigma towards it, especially with men.
mm,
um, we don't necessarily like talking about things which showcase like a lack of independence or a vulnerability. We try and stick to things which say, "Yeah, I'm dealing with this," but it's just a chip off the shoulder. It's just whatever.
mm,
But no, sometimes it can be really debilitating. And hopefully, the fact that I talked about it without being embarrassed, without trying to make it seem like it's this cool romanticized thing, um, hopefully that was helpful to other people. So yeah, that was great.
yeah. I feel like it's most often talked about when it comes to men in relation to like getting a girl. Like it's
Mm.
a way of like being vulnerable and then he gets the girl. There's nothing beyond that.
Yeah,
Like,
why would they want to establish this idea that in order to be like a valuable human being, you need to achieve that? It's like, oh, you
yeah,
went through this journey and now you get the reward, so you can be this self-actualized person. It's like,
yeah.
what what kind of message is that? You
Yeah,
know, like, I get that it might work in a piece of media. It provides this sort of, oh yay, happy ending.
yeah.
But I think that it's kind of the responsibility of storytellers to get smart and to use the form to elicit those same feelings through different means.
Mhm.
How can manipulate the story in order to give us that feeling of success from something else? Because I think that film is a great form of communication.
Mm,
A lot of people just simply watch films for the sake of entertainment, which is perfectly, that's awesome and
mm,
so incredibly valid. But there are also lots of films which are able to speak to social ideas. They're able to resonate with people in their own mental health experiences, and they can communicate a lot of abstract ideas which are really hard to verbally communicate. Like I could sort of sit here for ages and ages trying to talk about the ins and outs of anxiety, but I still don't think I'd achieve it as well as I do sort of without words by showing it in film, because that's why we use metaphors in conversation,
Mm,
because symbolism tends to be way more helpful
yeah.
sometimes. And you know, with that responsibility, which sounds so self-aggrandizing, but it's like this is the case for for anyone who makes, a tiny little film, for anyone who makes a set of Instagram reels, for whatever it is.
Yeah.
um you know we really should be trying to communicate ideas that aren't so black and white. You need to achieve this in order to feel good about yourself. You need to get to this place in order to express yourself, or say, oh yeah, I'm done with that, my journey's over. um that's something which I think it's incredibly important to subvert those expectations and still give us the emotional reaction of, oh yeah, this is success,
Mm,
even though people tell us that it's not success until he gets a seven-figure job.
mm.
It's like, no. um I think that that's something that art has an incredible capacity for.
I agree, and I I actually was reading your blog a few days ago, and
Mm.
the you had a post about a film that I just watched, All of Us Strangers, I think it's called.
Oh yeah, yeah,
And you were like, I think your the title was it was the therapy that I didn't pay for,
yeah,
or
yeah.
something like that. And it was that film fucked me up. Like I
Yeah,
felt things, and I was like, oh, and I often watch film just for entertainment, but there are some that I live something of myself through them, and that film for me was definitely that.
100%.
So
Gosh. And that's a very similar example. I mean, that's a way better film than mine, but like it's a similar example of something that it uses fantastical elements in order to get to the
yes,
heart of a deeply, deeply human experience. Because and I probably said this in the post, but you know, we often go through that thought process of thinking, what would I say to these people if they were here? Or in relation to parents, we might think, what would it be like communicating to them on an even playing field,
mm,
when there isn't the hierarchy of me being a kid and them being an adult? And those kind of films are very often the ones that I find sort of speak to me in the most personal way,
mm,
where it's not just telling us about something that is relatable, it's showing us how we feel. Like
yeah,
it's an emotional truth rather than a literal one. And in order to do that, like we have to bend the rules of reality.
yeah. That's I've never thought about it that way, but that's so true. And I I went into it just wanting to watch Paul Mescal, and I came
No,
out of it going, "Oh God."
me too.
Um,
Yeah, like I didn't expect to be bawling my eyes out. I just wanted to see a
yeah.
hot guy. Like, this is
Yes, yeah.
terrible.
Yeah, no, but you're so right. It really, I think fantasy does allow us. I felt that with Lord of the Rings in a lot of ways. I would come away from the Lord of the Rings movies horrifically depressed, but in this really strange way where I was like, I feel like I know something more about myself, but I'm really sad about it. Like
Yeah,
it unlocked
yeah.
something in that kind of what you spoke to before, that existentialism. Like there's, you know, this whole big world out there, and I'm terrified of finding my place in it.
Mm. Yeah, and that can be a challenging thing sometimes. Like, hopefully, most of the time when we experience that in art, it winds up being like a cathartic kind
Mm.
of dread or fear.
Yeah.
Not always. Sometimes that can happen. But either way, it's expanding us.
Yes.
It's illuminating something, and I very much think that any art form can be like an empathy engine. It doesn't just tell us about a different community or a different lifestyle or anything. It's showing us the emotions that come with that. That's something we don't really see on the news, for example,
Yeah,
or
or
when
in
people just
school or
yeah, yeah. Oh my goodness.
anywhere.
And that's why I think that even though some people will point to the inauthenticity of, putting music to something or juxtaposing it with the way that you edit, it's
Mm.
like, but that's how we see things in our head. That
Yes.
in my mind is the most emotionally accurate way to portray something. And it's only as manipulative as our own thoughts are. in
Mm,
that sense.
mm,
And it it can open us up so much to new ideas and to new experiences. And when it comes to stories that, fundamentally talk about human issues or mental health, um, not only can it be cathartic because it's sort of creating a mirror for us to look at our own problems and address them, but also it can help for people who maybe haven't had those experiences. Because if it works just on the basis of being like an entertaining story, it also can give you a window in.
yeah.
Um, and the way that I, thought about Spaceman was, um, hopefully some people will be able to relate to it, but also for the people who know me in particular, this movie will probably do a much more accurate job of explaining my experience than I have been able to.
Yeah.
Maybe they might go, oh, so that's what he's been going through. Yikes.
Mm.
And that to me is one of the most beneficial aspects of whatever particular artistic medium people are interested in.
Mm. I love it. So what's next for you after Spaceman? Whoa.
Well, I still have to do the whole rollout process for the film, which is going to be a bit crazy. We're having another screening for the movie on the 22nd of March, and then at some point I'm going to do like an online screening, considering that what the movie's about and my own position. It seems like the right thing to do.
Yes.
It'd be a bit bad if I didn't. Someone said to me at one point, when we were talking about different ways that we can roll out the movie without spending too much money, they said, "Oh, you should have an outdoor screening." And I was like, "Did you watch the movie? Is
Yeah.
that a good idea?"
There's
Like,
none of the intended audience are going to attend.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like, why would I do that? It's
Yeah.
terrible. But um, yeah, so I'm going to do that, and I've explored a couple of different things that I want to do for my next movie. Nothing's quite set in stone, but I do know that this movie acted a little bit as a calling card to some local people so that I don't have to make the next one like totally sort of alone with just
Mhm.
me and an actor. So hopefully it will be a more collaborative thing. And I'm always looking to say something that is like vulnerable and hopefully that like has that speaks to something that is like a fundamental issue that we deal with.
Mm,
But I also very much feel the catharsis of telling a story about mental health.
mm,
And I don't imagine that my next one will like specifically like there'll probably be some aspect of it because it's just naturally going to be ingrained in me.
mm,
But I'm not setting out to make a story specifically about anxiety or anything.
mm.
So
Yeah.
yeah, that's like a non-answer answer. I'm like, I don't know what I'm
No,
doing.
I mean, it's true, right? It's, I
Yeah,
don't know, I'm
yeah,
going somewhere.
yeah. There are ideas, but I guess we'll see where they go.
Yeah, no, amazing. So I always ask the same question to guests, which is what would you say to someone struggling? But for you in particular, I wanna I wanna refine it a little bit because
Okay.
I know there are people who are struggling with anxiety and
Mm,
agoraphobia, and I know that um, I think that they know that creativity is a way to heal, a way to channel that, a way to, just find their way through. What would you say to someone who wants to create something out of their struggle, but is worried about how to do it or what people might say, or, what would your advice be?
Well, your only real barometer for like a story being good is your own personal opinion. If you're worried about what other people will think, not only are you going to have a terrible experience, but you're probably not going to make that much of a good piece of art. Um, because in all likelihood, other people's opinion isn't that much different than our own. You know, there is a general idea of what like the objectively best movies are. Some people agree or disagree, but most people have the same opinions. Um, so we can only follow our own nose. Like, if it's about movies, make the kind of movie that you really want to see. What is your favorite movie that doesn't exist? Same with music. In my mind, I thought, what is the piece of media related to agoraphobia which would really help me, but doesn't exist?
Mm,
So It could be, I'm sure there was like maybe there was an element of writing your book and making your
Mm.
YouTube channel where it was the same thing of like, I
Yeah.
really wish this existed.
Yes.
Um, so, I guess that's a piece of advice that I would give. But in terms of difficulty, it's like a lot of the time when we're creative people, we have very ambitious ideas of what we want our art to be.
Mm.
Um, because in our head, we can create the perfect painting, the perfect movie. In real life, we can't yet because there are practical limitations.
Mm.
Um, so I think setting reasonable expectations, and then also it doesn't need to have everything yet. You will have your time later on to make this magnum opus and say everything you need to say. But we have years. We don't just make one project and then call it quits.
Mm.
If there's something we didn't get to do in one project, we can do it in our next one. We're
Mm.
just doing one thing. We don't say, "Oh my God, I'm making a risotto and this is terrible because I was supposed to make steak." It's like, well, you'll make steak tomorrow. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Uh, um, and with that, if there are any limitations we have now, let's work with it because at the end of the day, it's better to make something than to make nothing. That was very much something that I reckoned with Spaceman. I thought, oh God, this movie isn't going to look exactly the way I had it in my head. But I thought, if I don't do it with this equipment, with these resources, then I'm going to go through this whole period with absolutely nothing to show for it. And I want something.
Mm.
So let's just do the version which is possible. So whatever space you're in, whatever resources you have, if you can find a way of being creative with that, that's enough. You
Mm.
know, Even if it's the smallest possible form of expression, just practicing the way that you communicate your ideas in your art form, that's the most important thing, in my opinion.
Mm. Beautiful advice.
I try. What would your advice be in that particular space?
All of the above. I'm
Okay.
just going to completely piggyback off your
Yeah.
advice.
Copy, paste. Yeah, got it.
Yes. No, I just I don't know. I would say this the same thing in that like you just need to start where you are. Like you just need to start. Um and if it evolves, it evolves. Like if it starts out as one thing and then turns into something else, like just follow that. I think yeah, like my book started out as a different book to the one it ended up being, and I'm so proud of what it ended up being. And I just feel like we need to start where we are and then follow wherever it takes us. And it's always going to
100%.
be something that we needed to learn. It might not be the place we wanted to get to, but
It's always worth it. And even
yeah,
hopefully a lot of the time we're proud of the end result. And even if we're not, it's great practice.
yeah,
Like just
yeah,
just training that muscle of, if you wrote a draft of your book and then went, oh, I can't release this, but you wrote it.
mm,
It's like how many people can actually say like I wrote a book at a certain stage, and then everything beyond that is bonus points.
that's right. Yeah, yeah,
Mm,
absolutely.
mm.
Where can people watch Spaceman? Where can we find you? I will obviously link you in all the show notes, but where can we go?
Yeah, so my website is just called Elijah Cassidy. Right now, the movie is not available online. It will eventually be, but on my social media, which is also just Elijah Cassidy everywhere, I'll have information about when I'm doing an online screening. I'm not sure exactly like when the episode's going to be online, but I imagine that it will be towards the end of March.
Amazing. Yep.
Um, so yeah, everything will be there.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being on Us Anxious Folk. You are a delight of a human, I
Thank you.
have to say.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Us Anxious Folk podcast, the podcast for the chronically overwhelmed, perpetually panicked, anxious folk in all of us. If you would like to find more about me, you can find me on YouTube at Lauren Rose or on Instagram at Lauren R_Rose.